Hello and welcome. This is Mouse Gunner, and we're back with some more Automation the Car Company Tycoon game. Continuing on with our campaign roleplay of the Edison Car Company in 1986. So we're down to our last model for the 1986 year. We already have our Luna, our star, our constellation, our asteroid, and our brand new model, the satellite. So last we have the Comet. So the Comet is our kind of more true sports car. The Edison Satellite was more of an economic, lower cost sports car. So let's go ahead and build ourselves our Comet. Okay, so first things first, let's get it to 1986. And we need to select the correct body, which is going to be, I don't think I've seen it yet, this one. All right, and chassis, we're going to go monocoque. Corrosion-resistant steel, we're going to go with a mid-transverse mount, if I remember correctly, and double wishbone both and the front and rear. And we're going to go with corrosion-resistant steel for our body material. For the styling, I will do off-camera, and then we will be back in a little bit. And we're back. So as far as the styling went, I went with this kind of duller, charcoaly type color because, again, I'm trying to go for those duller tones in the 80s. Now, as far as the front end goes, it's pretty simple. You've got a couple indicators, and you have your badge as well as a kind of a minimal grille for the radiator up front. Now, there's no headlights, but you're going to have to kind of imagine that there's pop-up headlights. We don't have a graphic for the pop-up headlights that we could put on here, but you just imagine that right here and here on the body would be some pop-up headlights. Okay, moving along, I went with a much more angular look on the front end, the nose, much more pointed look. We have, again, I forgot the door handles, so let's go ahead and stick some on there. So we need door handles. I kind of like this style. And we'll go with, you know what? We'll go with the more chrome look. Make them a little bit bigger. There we go. And then we have a, let's go ahead and check that so it goes away. We have our air intake on the side, because obviously we're going to need that with a mid-mounted engine. And I have some cooling vents here for the engine, as I went with a more, sloped roof line with your glass in the back here. More than likely, the glass would allow you to see the engine down below, as sometimes these mid-mounted engines like to do. Or on the other hand, we might just have some kind of cover that you wouldn't really be able to see. It'd just be some carpet there. You have, for the rear, we have a couple simple tail lights here, matched with indicators and reverse lights. Your badge, a place for the license plate, as well as a wing here. Now, whether or not this wing is just going to be cosmetic or aerodynamic, I haven't really decided, but I'm leaning more towards the cosmetic end of things. All right, moving along, we're going to have to put our engine in here, and of course I'm going to do that so that we get our door handles. All right, so the engine we want is obviously going to be the CV6 from 86. Where that is right here. All right, and then we want the only variant that's available, which is the 3.6. And it didn't give us any issues, so it must have fit all right. And as you can see, though, this engine just really, honestly, just barely fits. I mean, it literally is clipping through bits of suspension and body panels. So this is why I didn't add on a turbocharger or an intercooler or any of that stuff, because I honestly didn't think it would fit. As a matter of fact, what's this? Oh, okay, that's the badge. I was kind of wondering what's this big block here hanging there. Yeah, because honestly, they have to fix the transmission. As you can see, the drive shaft here is clipping right through our exhaust. Yep. Okay. So there's the engine mounting. Let's move along to our engine. And in case you missed the last video when I did the engine build, I can go ahead and show you the numbers here. So we're looking at 235 horsepower and 226 foot-pounds of torque. So let's hop into our trim. So we're going to go with a manual transmission, 5-speed, and top speed and everything is going to have to be calculated when we're all done. More than likely, I'll go with a viscous LSD as well. I'm going to start off with medium compound road, but more than likely I'll switch to sports compound. And minimum, I'm probably going to go with 16-inch rims. And we'll have to play with the tire widths and everything later. We'll go with alloy. And what would be a nice design for our alloys? Because we use this for our satellite. We want to differentiate from the satellite, though. One thing I don't like is how tiny the spokes are and like all of your options. So I'm probably going to end up going this route as much as I don't think it's very period correct. More than likely, you know, a lot of these would be period correct if it wasn't for the fact that the spokes are just absolutely tiny. Yeah, they need more rim variations in the future. Brakes, we're going to go with solid 2-piston. We might upgrade that to a 3-piston in the front. Might as well make it as big as it can go. And we'll make it a solid 2-piston. We might also make these vented discs as well. And we'll go ahead and make that as big as it can be. All right, moving along. Go with fully clad here. Get rid of the wing angle. I don't think we're going to go with that. Any aerodynamic features initially, or maybe at all. I usually like to go about 10 above where we need things to be for our cooling airflow, so that looks about right. Interior, we're going to go with 2 seats, of course, and then we're going to go with probably standard interior and standard entertainment for now, and then I'm going to make power steering standard as well. Although that, you know, you might argue that makes it less of a driver's car. And we'll go with standard safety. Suspension setup, I'm going to go with standard, gas monotube, passive, and we'll go with the normal preset for now. And obviously I need to do a lot of tweaking before long. Wow, that spring stiffness is very, very soft. I don't know if that's going to be the way we go. All right. And there we get horrendous drivability numbers and other things. But obviously, we're going to have to do tweaks to this. So I'm going to go ahead and do that off camera as per usual, and we'll be back in a bit. And we're back. So I made 4 different trims. I have 2 standard trims and 2 premium trims, either manual or automatic, pretty much is the main difference. So you're all using the same engine, obviously. Now, let's go ahead and look at what we've got here. So stats come in at 44.2 for drivability, 37.7 for sportiness, 28.6 for comfort. Prestige comes in at 20.7, and safety comes in at 38.9. Miles per gallon comes in at 24.6, and 0 to 62 time comes in at 5.9 seconds, which is a definite improvement over the previous year's model, which I believe got 0 to 62 time of 6.3 seconds. But we're dealing with a lot more power here. All right, so let's go ahead and look at what we've got. So we've got that 5-speed manual, and I set the top speed so that we have our 5th gear being an economy gear going beyond our estimated top speed. Or cruising gear, you might call it. The spacing is set up pretty aggressively, and that's to get our 0 to 62 time down to the best of our ability. We ended up with a viscous LSD, as I said we would. Now, the tire setup, I will point out that the tire setup tab is still massively bugged, and it was incredibly bugged for what I was trying to do here with my tire setup. So I ended up with 16-inch rims, alloy, as I said, sports compound road. The tire width ended up being 195 in the front and 245 in the rear. Now, if you're asking why I did it that way, I would mess with this stuff, but honestly, it's where I want it to be, and I don't want to mess with it too much because it might screw up on me again. But usually speaking, you have this kind of dynamic with the steering behavior where it's either going to tend to oversteer or understeer. Oversteering tendency, and this is, again, not under acceleration, as far as I understand this graph. Oversteering tendency is going to kill your stats for your car. It might give you a little bit better sportiness, but you're going to die in drivability. I mean, it's just going to drop off dramatically. And as a result, I made the car a little bit more tame. And to do that, you're going to want to have your tire width set up definitely a lot wider in the rear than you have in the front. That's one of the main ways to get rid of it. You can get rid of it with some other setup choices in the suspension as well. But that's one of your main ways you're going to get rid of it, and that's what we ended up doing. I do have a bit of rim offset in the front to kind of fill out the profile because, you know, these are definitely smaller tires, so to get them out so they're actually, you know, filling the body of the car, you know, is kind of what I did that for. Also, you get a little bit of a performance increase by doing that as well. I didn't really have much of the choice when it came to the rim offset because I pretty much set it up bumped it up twice, and it went all the way up to 40. Again, this thing's glitched out as heck, and still is. Okay, moving on to the brakes. Now with the brakes, just as we had with the satellite, you don't need as big as brakes in the front as you do in the rear with a mid-engine mount with, all that weight in the rear. I ended up going with vented discs in the rear. It wasn't really required in the front, so I didn't do it. Now, pad type I set up a little bit more aggressively, but honestly, this had really no impact on brake fade as we don't have any brake fade. Now, I can increase the pad type even more so to increase sportiness over drivability, but that would be all it would be. It would be a trade for drivability and comfort for sportiness, which, we could do. It would make sense to do that, honestly, but I only went a little aggressive on the pad type. Now, aerodynamics, you kind of already saw how I set this up. Nothing really changed here, but you can go ahead and check the graphs. Again, I'm not an expert on this downforce stuff, and I'm not sure if I understand it 100%, but it sounds like we're getting, quite a bit of downforce on the rear, kind of automatically just with the shape of our body without any wing angle. So having any wing angle in the rear makes no sense because all we're going to do is increase that downforce even more, as you can see. And, actually, that does seem to improve stats in some regards. It does reduce our top speed. I wonder what it does for our acceleration. No real change. Okay, so that's interesting, but I'm not going to use downforce with this car, but I just want you to see kind of what that would do to us. So it's putting more weight on those rear tires, obviously, which did improve stats. The last time I played with this, it didn't, but maybe I didn't have my suspension set up quite right or something. You already saw what I did with the interior, so this is our standard trim. The premium trim, you're going to see some changes here. And with the suspension, I went with the standard, gas monotune passive sway bar that you saw before. And the suspension setup, the way I went was I checked out what the sport preset was like, and I checked out what the normal preset was like, and I ended up doing kind of a compromise in between the two. So I used the normal preset, but I did a lot of changing. First off, you kind of saw the spring stiffness was really soft, especially in the front. So I stiffened that up quite a bit, and that was one of the things that kind of helped with this steering behavior, kind of getting it to, stop doing that oversteering tendency. It also helped the stats in other regards as well. I also changed the camber as well, making it a little bit more negative than what they were going for. I increased the damper stiffness quite a bit, and it initially had the sway bar stiffness being equal, both front and rear, and I made it a little bit more rear biased, and I reduced the ride height quite a bit. Now, I didn't reduce it down to the point that the sportiness, the sport setting would be, and that did make it so that maybe I wouldn't have as much sportiness as I could have gotten. But the compromise for that is to get it down to the same level that the sports preset had it at was, again, not much of a gain for how much you lost in everything else. Having, I think it was something like a negative 4% bottom out stat, really hurts your drivability and your comfort. So, again, if I had gone down more with the ride height, though, I would have decreased the roll angle quite a bit more as well, though. So that's kind of a compromise as well. But we were able to get it down to 3.9. As I said, I could have done better, but this is kind of the way I decided to go with things. So let's go ahead and look at our detailed stats here. And as per usual, I'm going to, kind of breeze through this, give you a few seconds if you want to pause on any of these screens and kind of look at them in detail. But let's go ahead and check out what we've got. So we've got our detailed stats. We've got our sportiness. We've got our comfort. We've got the prestige. And finally, we have the safety. All right, let's go ahead and check out our test track here. So our top speed comes in at 156.4 miles an hour. Our weight distribution is very rear heavy. And again, I don't really agree with this. This is massively rear heavy. This is kind of the rear heavy that you would expect out of a rear engine car, not a mid-engine car. And that's kind of the argument I made in the last video I made. I mean, with a lot of mid-engine cars that are out there, they get pretty close to a 50-50 weight distribution. Mid-engine cars are going to be tending to be a little bit rear heavy if they don't do some kind of balancing in the car design to kind of mitigate that. That's one of the things I'm not so sure I'm as happy with the way that automation does things, is there's no way to get a 50-50 weight distribution unless you just luck out and the particular body that you're using just automatically ends up that way. This body is incredibly rear heavy, and there's nothing really you can do about it other than maybe marginal changes. And the engine I have is really not that heavy comparatively. You know, it's about 400 pounds. There's definitely a lot heavier engines, which would have made the weight distribution even more ridiculous. So I'm not really a big fan of the way that the weight distribution is, and I have a feeling that's one of the things that really is impacting our steering behavior, because this car is behaving like a rear engine car, even though it isn't. Okay, so let's go ahead and grab our track. We already talked about the 0 to 62 time. Now, cornering G's, we're doing quite well here. This is probably one of the better performers, but logically that makes sense. We set it up that way. This is supposed to be a sporty car. So I'm going to imagine the the balance of things with your top speed being one of the highest of the cars that we have, our 0 to 62 time being one of the quickest, our cornering G's being one of the best, that this is going to be probably the best run we have. Not probably, definitely the best run we have. So let's go ahead and run it and see what we've got. So we end up with an end time. I'm going to go ahead and stop this because the engine is pretty... Ooh, there we go. The engine's pretty loud. Any case, so the end result is we've got 1 minute 32.74. Now, I don't know if that's the best time we've ever had, but it's probably really close, if not the best time we've ever had with any time period. So this is a pretty good performer. So let's go ahead and look at some of our other builds. So obviously we have the automatic version, which the main thing that we're going to have with the automatic version is going to be a difference in that transmission. So we're mostly just going to focus on that. And I might breeze through some of the graphs in case you guys want to look at that. And I have to go and recalculate things here because it has a tendency to not have the graphs work until I do that. But we can see the direct comparison here in our stats, and I'm not going to read them off just to save time. But the main thing I want you to point out here is our 0 to 62 time and how much worse it is. And this is just straight up results of adding an automatic transmission into a car. That probably is in keeping with reality, kind of to a little bit, but I don't know. That drastic of a difference seems a little bit too much of a drastic difference. But in any case, let's look at what we've got. So the top speed I've reduced quite a bit, and this is to kind of combat what you tend to have, where the miles per gallon tends to be a lot better in an automatic transmission car than a manual transmission car, even though that makes absolutely no sense. Spacing is not quite as aggressive though, because of the balance of that. You lower the top speed, you have to usually reduce the spacing to deal with the wheel spin. Otherwise, everything else is pretty much the same across the board. So we'll just go ahead and look at some of this stuff. If you want to look at graphs and see how things have changed. I'm going to imagine this car is a little bit lighter. And as a result, not quite as rear heavy, because the automatic transmission again is illogically less weight. And again, let's look at our suspension setup. So it's pretty much the same. And we're going to go ahead and we're going to look at the detailed stats here now. And again, I'm going to just go through this real quickly. So we have detailed stats. We have drivability. We have sportiness. We have comfort. We have prestige. And we have safety. Okay, let's look at our test track. So obviously our top speed's dropped off as I lowered the setup for the top speed. And our 0 to 62 time is a lot worse because of the automatic transmission. Otherwise, our cornering G's look about roughly the same. Our weight distribution looks a little bit better, but doesn't seem like that much of a difference. And let's go ahead and run our test track time here. And I'm going to do this pretty quickly so we can just see our time. So we gained about 2 seconds, a little bit less than that from the manual to the automatic, which, makes sense. We have less top speed. We have worse 0 to 62 time, which is probably going to be the big thing that's going to affect us. Otherwise, more or less the same. So let's go ahead and jump into our premium trim. We're going to have our premium manual here. And as per usual, I'm going to probably have to recalculate things so that we're actually getting our graphs behaving themselves. Okay, there's a little bit more changes here with the premium trim versus the standard trim. You will notice a little bit of change in the gearbox. I have a little bit more aggressive spacing. Not much else changes, and that's due to the fact that this car weighs more, so you get more weight on the wheels, so I can set up a more aggressive spacing. The end result is we have the same 0 to 62 time. If I hadn't done what I did, though, it would have been a worse 0 to 62 time, so keep that in mind. But we do see a lot of the numbers change here as a result of the more premium trims and everything that we chose. Again, nothing really changed. The wheel setup, brake setup should be about the same. We don't have any brake fade, even though we increased weight, because I allowed for a little bit of leeway with the brakes, making them a little bit bigger than they really needed to be. And also we had the pad type aggressiveness. So I didn't expect to see any brake fade here. Cooling airflow is going to be exactly the same. Nothing changed here. We have the same engine, so nothing's going to change. Now, the interior is where we mostly have our differences. We have premium interior, premium entertainment. That's going to increase weight quite a bit. And I also added in an ABS system, which is where you see a lot of the bonus to drivability, for instance. Suspension setup, I didn't change, even though we do have that weight dynamic change. I didn't feel like it was needing a change. And let's go ahead and look at our detailed stats. So we've got drivability, we've got sportiness, we've got comfort, prestige, and finally safety. Okay, let's go ahead and look at our test track. Now I'm going to imagine the corner Gs are a little bit worse, which they did turn out that way. Our weight distribution looks a little bit worse. Kind of hard to say. I don't really remember what it was for the manual. I know for the automatic it was like 68.7, I think. So it's worse than that, but I don't know about the other manual. Our top speed's roughly the same. It's probably a little bit worse, but 156.2 versus 156 point whatever it was before. So not a whole lot of difference. I'm going to expect this time to be very similar to the time that we got with the normal trim, but just slightly worse. So let's go ahead and look at that. And just stop it real quick here. So the end up time was 132.88, and I think I was pretty close. I mean, I was pretty much right there. I think before we got 132.7 something. Now we're getting 132.8 something. So a little bit worse, but not by much. And I would say most of that's probably the cornering Gs and maybe a little bit drop in top speed. Okay, we have one more trim to look at, and that's the premium automatic. And you're going to probably see the same kind of dynamics we saw before. It's going to be pretty close to the way that the other automatic was, but just slightly worse as far as the track time. So let's go ahead and recalculate things so we get our graphs again. So with the gearbox, again, it's the same kind of idea. Because I had more weight, I was able to go a little bit more aggressive on the spacing, which makes up for the weight increase. So we ended up with the same 0 to 62 time we had with our other automatic trim. We do have a little bit of drop off in fuel economy, though, which I'm sure we also had with our other premium trim as well. Now, tires, again, pretty much the same. Brakes are going to be the same. And again, we don't have any brake fade. This is going to be the same as well. The entertainment hasn't changed from the other premium trim. And the suspension is going to be pretty much the same. So if we hop into things, we'll go ahead and look at our detailed stats first. So we have drivability. We have sportiness. We have comfort, prestige, and finally safety. So let's look at our test track here. So again, top speed is going to be less than it was with our manual versions. 0 to 62 times going to be worse. It looks like our cornering Gs are also about roughly the same as there was with our other premium trim. And it looks like, from what I can see from the weight distribution, it's slightly better, but not quite as good as our standard trim was. So that definitely is a difference here. Okay, so let's go ahead and run our time. And there we see our final time, so 1 minute 34.54. So that's pretty much the rundown of these cars. Now, as I said, we have a little bit worse, rear, more of a rear weight bias from the premium trim. From the standard trim to the premium trim, we get a little bit worse in the rear weight bias. But honestly, if you think about it, does that make even any sense? Because where are you going to be adding weight with a premium interior? Mostly the front, right? I mean, it's going to be seats, which are on the front. You're going to have more sound deadening, which is mostly going to be in the front. Keeping it in between you and the engine more likely is going to be where most of that is. So kind of in the middle to the front. You're going to have your entertainment, which is all going to be up front. So why is there more of a weight bias or more of a rear weight bias with a premium trim? That doesn't make any sense. Most of the weight you'll be adding on will be in the front, which should have made your weight bias better. Less rear heavy. So again, sometimes I scratch my head on some of the dynamics of this game. They just don't, you know, they don't follow, your logic, what you would think would be the logical conclusion of different setups. It doesn't necessarily follow that. Okay, so let's go ahead and make sure everything's saved, and let's go ahead and do our comparison. Now, from what I'm seeing, stats-wise, this car is actually one of our best performers pretty much across the board. And we can grab a couple models here as a reference. So we've got our Satellite, we've got our Comet, and I'm going to grab the Constellation as well, just as a comparison. Let's go across the board here. So as far as the Comet goes, drivability-wise, it looks like it's one of our better performers. It doesn't quite meet what some of the Constellation ones can do, and I think the Luna is one of our good performers as well. Yeah, so it outmatches. It comes close to what the Luna can do, which is pretty surprising considering that the Luna is not really set up to be sporty. So that's kind of interesting to see. I'm not going to look at the Luna very much more because we can only fit so much on the screen. Sportiness, obviously, it's going to beat pretty much anything we have. That makes, perfect sense. It's set up to be a true sports car. So we're looking at, a lot better numbers than even we got with our Satellite. Comfort, I think we're going to lose out in a lot of areas. Let's see. So if we're looking at, for instance, our turbo versions, I think that our standard Comet is going to compute well. It's going to do better than our Satellite. But when you compare versus our standard, we're not doing quite as well. They've got 32.2, we've got 31.3. So it's kind of a give or take depending on which engine we're comparing here. But as a matter of fact, I think I read that wrong. I'm looking at the automatic trim here, so I shouldn't have been looking at the manual trim. So it looks like we're worse off if I look at that again, because if we compare standard to standard, as a matter of fact, our turbo is better. So I was just misreading this because of the way the game orders things for you. So I misread that. So it does look like our Comet is worse off in comfort, which doesn't really surprise me too much. Prestige-wise, though, we win out in comparisons to the Satellite, which makes perfect sense. The Constellation does better in the premium trim here with the V8, but otherwise, I think it loses out for the most part. The only one that really does, and we'll ignore the Ultimate because that was just something that we did as a demonstration piece. So it does better than our standard 4.9, I think, for the most part. The only real trim that this beats is our standard 3.6, but this, has an automatic transmission and other things going on, and it's V8. So you have that benefiting you too, because this game benefits you for having more cylinders and more displacement and things like that as far as prestige goes. Safety-wise, interestingly enough, it's a lot safer than the Constellation, which makes me kind of confused. I didn't actually expect that. It looks like Constellation is not very safe at all, actually. And usually weight is a big factor of why a car has good safety numbers. And this car is, a lot heavier than the other cars we're looking at, and somehow it has better safety ratings. The lighter cars do. So I'm not exactly sure what that's all about. Something about these bodies and the setup that I did makes them more safe than a much bigger and heavier car. I'm not exactly sure about that. What did the Luna get? All right, so the Luna kind of got safety along the lines of, wow, that's kind of weird. I never really noticed that until just now, that for some reason the Constellation is one of the least safe models we have. Okay. Reliability-wise, I think our Comet's probably the worst performer there, which is not too surprising. Mostly our standard 3.6. Well, actually, it's not too bad, because I don't think we have really a direct comparison here. I mean, the more direct comparison would be our standard 2.2 versus our standard 3.6, and in that case, we win. the satellite wins, but definitely the turbo engines are going to be not so great. Well, I would say mostly the Comet is our worst performer as far as reliability, which we didn't really build it that way, and it doesn't really surprise me too much. Economy-wise, we do better than the turbocharged versions of the satellite and better than the Constellation, but not quite as good as the standard naturally aspirated engines in our satellite, which the satellite is ridiculous as far as that goes with its economy. Utility-wise, again, our worst performer. Again, not too surprising. Production unit-wise, this is probably the most expensive car we have to build, both, well, production unit-wise and cost, I would say probably. Again, it's kind of hard to, easily see direct comparisons because of the way that they just kind of randomly order things, and there's no way to actually sort this or the, different trims. But from what I'm seeing, this is one of our more expensive to build and long-term or length of time builds as far as our models go. In any case, I hope you guys have enjoyed this video. This is Mouse Gunner signing out.